This video will be discussing how receptors can act as an on and off switch while focusing on the example of orexin. There are multiple types of receptors within cells. These include G-protein coupled receptors, ligand-gated channel receptors, and enzyme coupled receptors. The most common and used type of receptors are G-protein. Depending on what binds to the receptor, it will activate or inactivate a cell. Ligand-gated receptors allow ions to pass through the membrane in response to the binding of chemical messengers. Lastly, enzyme-coupled receptors respond to the binding of a ligand, causing enzymatic activity inside of the cell. Each one of these allows for the cell to produce or not produce certain activities in the cell that can have control over our health, sleep patterns, mood, and much more. G-protein coupled receptors are responsible for the majority of physiological processes that go on in the body. These can include muscle contractions, hormone responses, and even some special senses. Without these receptors, our bodies would not function correctly. G-protein coupled receptors work when a ligand attaches to the receptor. The receptor undergoes a conformational change. An alpha G protein exchanges GDP for GTP and moves over the adenylyl cyclase, which converts ATP to CAMP. CAMP is referred to as the second messenger and is used in many physiological processes. The idea of receptors was considered controversial when first brought to light in 1905 by John Newport Langley. He explained that these hypothetical receptors could interact with chemicals and stimuli while acting on effectors within the cell to change function. His ideas were ignored and disregarded. Later on, in 1948, another scientist, Raymond P. Elquist, claimed that adrenaline contained an alpha and a beta receptor. In the 1970s, with the odds against them, 3 different scientists, Lefkowitz, Williams, and Karen, performed numerous ligand bindings and gene sequences to narrow down the 7 specific membrane proteins of the G-protein coupled receptors. These are now used in the majority of drugs on the market. Orexin receptor 1 and 2 play an important role in regulating sleep and wakefulness, with receptor 2 known to be more significant. The orexin peptide acts as the key to an orexin receptor lock to then produce orexin neurons. Loss of the orexin-producing neurons, the peptides or receptors, leads to narcolepsy, a condition in which REM sleep gets mixed with wakefulness, causing hypnagogic hallucinations and muscle paralysis. Cataplexy, a different condition in which strong emotion or laughter causes a person to suffer sudden physical collapse though remaining conscious. And sleep apnea, where breathing repeatedly stops and starts during sleep. An orexin antagonist helps to treat insomnia and other sleeping disorders. Research suggests that reduction of orexin neurons in human narcoleptics is caused by an autoimmune attack on the cells, which causes the cells to be vulnerable to cytokines and cell death inducer. There is a lack of direct evidence of precise intracellular signaling explaining sleep and wake regulation. However, the link between orexin or receptor and sleep or wake cycle has been well defined. As a final emphasis, G-protein coupled receptors are considered one of the more important types within the body. They are responsible for multiple physiological processes that allow for humans to function. While being discovered in 1905, they were not truly accepted until the 70s, where they were finally deemed an important find. Lastly, the G-protein receptor of orexin has recently been studied and identified with sleeping patterns. If disrupted or removed, narcolepsy, sleep apnea, and other sleeping disorders can occur, resulting in the interference of the healthy homeostasis within the body. In conclusion, these little receptors in each of our cells run the most important processes of our body, amazing us all who study them.
Here are some examples of quiz questions. 1. Orexin A and orexin B are produced in which part of the brain? 2. What kind of channel allows ions to pass through in response to binding of chemical messenger? 3. Who brought the idea of receptors that receptors could interact with chemicals, stimuli, and act on effectors within the cell to change function to light in 1905? Here are the answers to the questions. Orexin A and orexin B are produced in the neurons of the lateral hypothalamus. Second question, the ligand-gated channel allows ions to pass through in response to binding of a chemical messenger. And the third question, Langley brought the idea of receptors, that it could interact with chemicals, stimuli, and act on effectors within the cell to change functions to light.